Okay, welcome everyone. Good morning to those of you who are present with us here in the Kenny Auditorium, to those of us who are joining online. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. I am Cinnamon Dornsife. I'm the director of the SAIS Foreign Policy Institute, and it is my great privilege and honor to welcome our very distinguished speaker. Today's discussion is going to focus on Kosovo's efforts to advance its democracy, its economy, and its security, given the many challenges it faces and the clear downturn across the region. President Osmani, our distinguished speaker, is a reformer with a very strong following and support among the citizens of Kosovo. President Osmani is an inspiration to many, one of the few women leaders at the top of a government in Europe, and not just the Balkans. The US and Kosovo have very strong relations at official and at societal levels. And her visit comes at an important time of mounting challenges in the Balkans that have directly engaged US and EU officials. I am now going to introduce our very distinguished expert moderator, Edward Joseph, who is a fellow at the senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Institute, and he's a leading commentator and analyst on the Balkans. He brings a rare combination of on-the-ground experience gained over a period of 12 years, including throughout the war years, as well as academic writing, teaching, and public speaking. Edward has served in every conflict theater of the Balkans during the war years, as well as in post-war peace, implementation, and stabilization endeavors. He's got a background in the US military and serving in the Army. He has also a very distinguished civilian career, serving in a number of leading civil society organizations, and also as a senior official in all three of the region's divided cities. Edward has also brought his career in conflict management into the classroom here at SAIS, where he is a lecturer in conflict management and also a senior fellow at our Foreign Policy Institute. So I am now pleased to turn the floor over to you, Ed, and you will introduce our very distinguished speaker. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Dornsife, and welcome everyone to this timely, very timely event. I want to welcome everyone here in our in-person audience. Special acknowledgement of Ambassador Pierre Shimunovic, Ambassador of Croatia. Welcome, Mr. Ambassador, and welcome to our live streaming audience here in the United States and around the globe, including back in Kosovo. This event is indeed, as Ambassador Dornsife mentioned, quite timely, given the significant deterioration in the Balkans over a period of years, but really more precipitously over these past several months. And that is well known to many of the folks in this audience and, of course, those watching in the region. Indeed, President Osmani, it is both an honor and a pleasure to welcome you to SAIS, and I want to explain why it's both both an honor and a pleasure. First, it's a particular honor because as the president of Kosovo, under your constitution, you lead the foreign policy of your country. And it was yours and the government's decision to immediately answer the call from President Biden to accept refugees from Afghanistan this summer. And let me quote you at that time, Madam President. Today, without any hesitation or single conditioning, I have given my consent to this humanitarian operation. So let me say, it's an honor, President Osmani, and as a member of the SAIS community, a veteran, and as an American, I want to thank you for immediately offering Kosovo's assistance when our government called. Thank you very much. Second, it's a pleasure because as someone who has worked in the region for many years and also taught conflict management here, you are a reflection of the progress that your own country has taken. In fact, you are living proof, and your country is living proof, that much derided nation building can and actually does work. President Osmani, permit me here to share a bit about your own journey and how it's a reflection of the progress of your young, in all respects, both demographically and in its short length of existence since 2008, the journey that Kosovo itself has taken during this period. You were a refugee during the war, forced out of your home in Mitrovica at gunpoint, returning to your country after the NATO air campaign. As you said when you welcomed the Afghan refugees, nobody better than we knows what it means to be expelled and to leave by force from where you grew up, to be separated from your loved ones, to be forced to flee to save your life. After the war, you studied law at the University of Pristina. Then, reflecting the close bond between the Republic of Kosovo and the United States, you studied in this country, earning your master's and PhD in law at the University of Pittsburgh, where you also lectured. Unlike many students from the region, you went back to Kosovo. And as chief of staff for the Kosovo president and his advisor on legal affairs and international relations, you were present at the creation of the independent Republic of Kosovo. You represented Kosovo in the drafting of the country's constitution, and you were a member of the team representing Kosovo at the International Court of Justice for the case that was brought by the UN General Assembly at Serbia's behest, a case in 2010 that the International Court of Justice ruled that Kosovo's Declaration of Independence violated neither international law nor the relevant UN Security Council resolution. You entered electoral politics yourself and emerged as a principled voice in your own party, ultimately breaking to form your own political union, and in last February's national elections, winning the most votes of any candidate, male or female, in that last election. You've served as Speaker of the Assembly, and following the landmark elections in February, you and Prime Minister Albin Kurti represent a new generation of leadership, not so much in age, but in focus, with an unblinking determination on rooting out corruption and developing your country's economy and its democracy. And permit me, since that word democracy is very much au courant these days in Washington and elsewhere, to cite the fact that Kosovo, which started with essentially no institutions, is an enviable democracy in the Balkans. The Kosovo police force, which didn't exist, is highly respected among Kosovo's citizens. Kosovo has a strong multi-party system with no trend whatsoever towards the worrying trend globally and in Europe towards autocracy. Media is vibrant, rule of law is a priority of the government and an issue under international scrutiny and assistance as well. And while relations and trust with the Serb community, particularly on rights of Serbs to return and on some other key issues, remain a shortfall, there have been tremendous strides. And allow me just briefly to quote from the 5-year OSCE Community Rights Assessment Report issued this June 2021. This is an organization that Serbia and Russia are both members of, and it states, this report states, interethnic relations have improved since the last reporting period. Significant divisions continue to exist between the Kosovo Albanian and Kosovo Serb community, but social and institutional interaction has been enhanced, and no cases of collective or major interethnic violence has occurred. Relations among the majority Kosovo Albanian community and other non-majority communities have remained functional and positive. Unlike in Bosnia, the majority of Serbs live across the broad population rather than consolidated in one compact unit. And Kosovo Serbs have long participated in free and fair elections in Kosovo and continue to participate in government, unlike in Bosnia where they have withdrawn from institutions. The point is that Kosovo certainly deserves acknowledgement as a developing democracy, a reliable friend of the US, an eager ally with a clear Euro-Atlantic desire and perspective. And President Osmani, you personify all that. Kosovo faces many challenges in achieving this vision, in dealing with the challenges posed by the lack of recognition from Serbia and 5 EU countries, 4 of which are members of NATO, and as a country in a region which, again, has seen significant deterioration and uncertainty about the will of the European Union. President Osmani, again, it's my honor to welcome you to SAIS, and we all welcome the opportunity to discuss Kosovo's future in a challenging region. Please.
Thank you so much. It's truly a great pleasure to be here. I'm absolutely delighted to be at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. As I was talking a little earlier with the professors who welcomed me, talking to students at campuses and meeting with professors is one of the must parts of every single visit that I make internationally, especially here at the United States. Because I truly know that I'm speaking to the leaders of tomorrow, to those of you that I will, after a few years, be meeting at the State Department, try to convince you about the progress that my country is making, or at other institutions around the United States. So truly a great pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me, dear professors, excellencies, ambassadors, all of you. I think I should definitely point out that I'm speaking to some of the best young minds who have an interest in international relations. The story of Kosovo is definitely a success story, but at the same time is a fascinating story for all of those who are interested either in international law, in international relations, or in politics. So I want to say thank you to everyone that is present here in person, but as well to those of you who are joining us via video. Given your field of study, I am sure that many of you are familiar with Kosovo's history. It is, after all, in your international relations and international law books, but I will try to explain some of the things that you don't get in the books. Practically, how to build a country from scratch, which is exactly what we had to do after a very painful history and a long struggle that the people of Kosovo had to go through. As the recently elected president of the Republic of Kosovo, I have the privilege of representing the youngest country in Europe, not just in terms of the age of the country, 13 years old, but also in terms of the youngest population in Europe. Over 70% of the people of Kosovo are under the age of 35. So in the aging continent of Europe, this is an outstanding potential. And I'm a strong believer that our country will move forward, including from an economic point of view, at the time when we turn our attention, our investment, as well as our budget, to investing in our people, in our human capital, which is the biggest, as I said, potential of the country. At 13 years old, the Republic of Kosovo is obviously younger than all of you here today, but at the same time, it has made tremendous progress. Every step of the way, we were joined and supported by our most important allies, primarily the United States of America. So when we talk about the Republic of Kosovo, about its people, many think about it in the context of the war. Obviously, that is an important context. I have to say that I often meet people around the world who think that the world started in 2011 with the Kosovo-Serbia dialogue. But there is a context to it, and it goes back to the time when Milosevic, the former leader of Yugoslavia and Serbia at that time, known as the Butcher of the Balkans, stripped off Kosovo of its own autonomous rights, therefore violating every single basic right of the Kosovo citizens, starting from our basic right to education. I was a little kid there, in my second grade at elementary school, and all of us were kicked out of our schools for the very simple reason that we were not of the same ethnicity as Milosevic's regime. So we were not allowed to go to school. Our parents were all kicked out of their jobs. We were not allowed to pursue any of the civil liberties or even cultural rights that belonged to us, based not just on the constitutional setting of that time, but at the same time of international conventions to which the Yugoslav regime, the Serb regime at that time, was a signatory and ratifying party. So practically, we lived, we grew up under an apartheid-like regime. I'm sure you all know of South Africa. Obviously, this apartheid-like regime was not based on racial differences. It was based on ethnic differences. But every single violation of right was legislated by the Milosevic regime, so we would not be allowed to live free and prosper in the country where all of our ancestors had lived for many centuries. So this is an important context to understand because it led to the bloody wars that were waged by the Milosevic regime. Obviously, the international community intervened in 1999 to stop the horrendous crimes that regime were committing against all of us, the people of Kosovo. But until that point, I have to mention that more than 150,000 people were killed in former Yugoslavia. Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, the Republic of Kosovo, all of these three countries suffered immensely from these regimes until they managed to become independent, sovereign, and prosperous countries that they are today. So for that reason, this context truly matters to understand even the developments of today. Because while our countries have changed, it is unfortunate that the regime in Serbia continues to follow the same mindset, but with a different strategy. A mindset which tries to establish the so-called Greater Serbian World, which is the exact same mindset, belongs to the previous centuries, that has led to the wars in former Yugoslavia. So the context is extremely important to understand what's going on today. However, the history of the war and Kosovo being a war-torn society is just one part of the story. Kosovo today is a vibrant and a youthful place in Europe, a prosperous country that is moving ahead with record-breaking numbers in terms of economic development, with endless opportunities and new institutions that are ready to grasp all of these institutions on behalf and for the citizens that we all represent. In fact, if you haven't been to Kosovo already, I urge you to come and see the progress that we've made for yourself. From our rich and very diverse culture to economic opportunities to hiking across our beautiful mountains, you will be pleasantly surprised by what you will find in this small country in the heart of Europe. Obviously, to get to here, quite a lot of strives and quite a lot of sacrifice we had to go through. After the war in 1999, Kosovo had the biggest international presence, civil and military, that one knows of in recent history. But it was perhaps one of the very few countries in the world that absolutely welcomed this international presence. Kosovo considered and still considers the international partners, especially NATO soldiers who entered in 1999, as the saviors of democracies, as those who actually made sure that our liberty finally happened, and as our eternal partners, partners with whom we want to work in the future. And we consider the partnership primarily with the United States, but also with the EU and NATO members, as one of the most fundamental values based on which our country has been formed and has been shaped at the very beginning. In 2008, when we declared independence, many of the institutions had to be built from scratch. Practically, we never had the Ministry of Foreign Affairs before. We didn't have diplomats, so our ministry had to be built from zero. We never had the Ministry of Defense or an army before. And now what we have achieved in these past 13 years is from being a country that exported security, that had international military presence, we've become an exporter. Actually, from being an importer, we became an exporter of security by having our military forces serve alongside the US forces in the Middle East, and we're very proud that we're going to join the United States Army in other operations around the world. So the soldiers of the Kosovo Security Force have progressed so much, fully in line with NATO standards, and they have become one of the most professional armies in the region, joining the US and other NATO allies in exercises such as NATO's Defender Europe 21 and other kind of exercises we continually join to show that this is not just learning or expertise experience together with the United States, but it's our vision as a people. It's the vision of the army, it's the vision of the leadership, but most importantly, is the will of the people of Kosovo. What we, of course, are witnessing right now is, 13 years old institutions who are doing the best that they can to deal with some of the biggest challenges that Kosovo faces internationally. Obviously, the new institutions that were elected in February of this year were elected in a platform that was based in rule of law, first of all, and economic opportunities, secondly, as we call it, the jobs and justice platform. Nevertheless, we are all aware that while we deal with the domestic challenges, it's not like the globe is going to wait for us until we're done. And obviously, in democracies, you're never done. It's never enough. However, it is extremely important that we're focusing on not just preserving and protecting, but also enhancing the bilateral relations we have with our partners, while working together with them so that we have a seat at the table in multilateral fora where Kosovo has not managed to join so far, practically because of the Serbian and Russian opposition. Whether we're talking about UN agencies and ultimately at the UN itself, or with other organizations within the European Union and Europe as a region. These are some of the priorities of Kosovo's foreign policy that we're working on. I definitely want to point out that the elections of 14th of February did show a historic outcome, which is a result of the resilience of the people of Kosovo primarily. And this has given us not just a huge support, but a huge responsibility to deliver on so many of the challenges, domestic or international. But this has given us, at the same time, a very positive momentum for change, a positive change, and our institutions unrivaled levels of trust from our citizens, which makes things, of course, much easier, whether we're talking about international relations or domestic reforms. Also, at the same time, this means that the expectations, as I said, are extremely high, and we must ensure that we deliver on the promises when it comes to the rule of law, on one hand, delivering when it comes to creation of new jobs, especially for youth and women, in the other, and in particular, those that are centered around creating all of these economic opportunities. Now, while Kosovo had to go through a very peculiar and unique path of engaging in bilateral recognitions, unlike many other former Yugoslav republics who had a couple of recognitions, became members of the United Nations, and afterwards almost no one actually challenged their statehood. In the case of Kosovo, it's a little different. Since Russia is vetoing or threatening to veto our membership at the United Nations, our efforts have been mainly bilateral. So we engage with almost the 200 countries that are around the world to convince them to recognize Kosovo's independence so that we can have as many recognitions as possible, and that would in turn help us become members of important international organizations. So far, we're members in a number of respectful IOs and almost 100 regional organizations, to say the least, but is not enough. Because as I believe that joining an international organization ultimately means that it is your citizens who are your end beneficiaries. Whether we're talking about the WHO, where because of the pandemic we understood how important it is to be part of such international fora, which help you get either better prices when you buy medical supplies for your citizens, or negotiate with partners to make sure that you offer all of these quality services in the area of medicine, to organizations such as Interpol, which helps us fight cross-border crime, or the Council of Europe, which is extremely important because by joining this organization, our citizens will ultimately have the right to go to the Strasbourg Court, the European Court of Human Rights, for any kind of human rights violations. All of these make our citizens the end beneficiaries. So it's not just about having a seat at the table and having your voice heard. It's about making sure that we collectively work to make the lives of our citizens much better by being part of those international fora and by being part of that table. Perhaps one point that I should make when it comes to progress, And I don't say this just because I'm elected as president of Kosovo in the latest election, where the people of Kosovo showed a very high degree of emancipation and changes in the mentality of the past, which was a strong patriarchy, and making a woman the most voted person in the history of the country was a clear signal to all politicians out there in Kosovo, in the region and beyond, that including women in your political life, making sure that they have a seat at the table, not just any table, by the way, the decision-making table, is key to achieving greater benefits in a society. So it's not just the right thing to do, morally speaking, it's the smartest thing to do, because by unleashing their potential in politics, you are also giving space, offering space to unleash their economic potential, which means that the economy of the country will be benefiting by using the potential of the other 50% of the population. So we're really hoping that by having had the trust of the citizens, not just myself as president, but women ministers in the government, we have the highest percentage compared to any government in previous governing seasons, if I may call it so. And the highest percentage in the parliament from any other legislature in the history. It is important, but I think we should only be fulfilled and proud at the day when we as women can use the political power that we have to deal with the daily most acute problems that other women in our society are dealing with, whether it's housewives or women in economy, to deal with the daily problems from economic empowerment to access to justice, to domestic violence and other problems that women around the world are also facing. But I think it's an incredibly positive momentum with the change and the empowerment of women that the people of Kosovo themselves made possible through our election. Perhaps to try to conclude so that we can have more of a conversation about the important topics. We are working day and night to make sure that Kosovo will be the home that all of our people are proud of, especially the young people of Kosovo. Working hard to provide the employment opportunities that they deserve, to strengthen the rule of law, which I see as a precondition to our success in every other area, whether it's economy or elsewhere. To make sure that we move ahead towards European integration, because for us the EU is not a cash machine. It's a values-based system, and we really work on the principle of fundamentals first. We really believe that only those countries who deliver on human rights, democracy, and rule of law truly deserve to move ahead. This year, as rightly pointed out by our honorable professor, we were the very first country to say yes to the United States when it comes to hosting Afghan refugees. We did that for two purposes. The first one was to simply show that the words "never forget" are not just a slogan for us. We never forget what the rest of the world did for us when we became refugees, when countries from the United States all the way to New Zealand opened their doors and hearts for us. We are alive today because we had friends by our side, because there were people who didn't turn away and didn't turn their backs on all of the crimes that were being committed against all of us. So ultimately, it was our time to give that helping hand as well and to show that we care. And that secondly, to show that while as refugees we understand that while the political context between Kosovo and Afghanistan may really be different, it is human suffering, which is the same. It's the same. For that reason, we wanted to be there, and to be there with our friends, most importantly, our ally, the United States, the country that stood by us in the darkest day and in the brightest and continues to be with us even today, and to show that whenever the United States needs a country like Kosovo, no matter how small we are, in these kinds of cases, you can have a great impact through the message that you deliver internationally. And I do hope that we have made that message clear, that to people who are in need, because they don't choose to leave, no one chooses to become a refugee, just no one. No one really chooses to leave their homes in such a way unless they are, going away from terror and crimes. We are very proud of the decision that we have not only made as institutions, the first country in the world, but of the way how the people of Kosovo have embraced it and have supported it. For that reason, I perhaps should reiterate the message today that the message that our U.S. partners hear every single day from every one of us. The relations that we have with the United States go beyond any single politician. They are not just ironclad, but they are very fundamental to every single citizen of the United States. And because the foundations are very strong, and because the foundations are very strong, there's nothing that will ever be able to make them either less strong or to in any way shake them. I am very proud with the relations that the new institutions have created with the new administration of the United States. We are working together day in, day out to coordinate and to align every single decision of our foreign policy with those of the United States and the European Union. And again, that's because that's the vision we believe in. It's because that's the will of the people of Kosovo, and that's one thing that we will never give up on. That being said, the challenges are immense, primarily because, as the topic that you read from today, is that Kosovo belongs to a very challenging region, a region where Russia has a very specific interest. And their interest is not simply because they want to destabilize the tiny Republic of Kosovo. It's because the Western Balkans is the region where they want to undo everything American, everything the United States has achieved in the past 2 or 3 decades, which is stability, democracy, most important, values that any part of the world needs to then go towards a journey of self-reliance and economic development. Stability and democracy. Kosovo is the biggest success story of the United States of America's foreign policy. Russia, by attacking our part of the world, is mostly trying to send a message to the United States to attack the values for which the US, the European Union, and NATO stood for back in 1999 when they saved our lives, and even today when they are working alongside each and every one of us to try to save the stability and democracy in our part of the world. Obviously, Russia has found a trampoline for its influence, and that is the Serbian government, who continues to destabilize Kosovo, Montenegro, and Bosnia and Herzegovina by creating nowadays one of the biggest concerns in the past 20 years of a reoccurring war in the Western Balkans. Obviously, all of these 3 countries, whether Kosovo, Bosnia and Herzegovina, or Montenegro, have been working for peace and stability, whereas Serbia has been doing the opposite in order to push forward their expansionist ideas and the Russian malign interest in the region. Not just Russia, if I may add, also the Chinese economic interests as well, but it's mostly the Russian interest to destabilize the Western Balkans so that in this way they can attack the European Union as well. A peaceful Balkans means a peaceful Europe. That's not what Russia wants. They don't believe in peace or values. The pattern that they have used with Ukraine, Georgia, and other countries in former USSR is the pattern that they are trying to use through Serbia in our part of the world, in the Western Balkans. And obviously, we need to work alongside our partners to stop this from happening. Because as I said, the project of a European Union united and at peace is possible only with a peaceful Western Balkans within it, not outside it. A peaceful Europe ensures also our collective Euro-Atlantic success. So to end on that note, I want to thank you all for having me, and I really look forward to answering your questions and to the conversation that we're going to have in the next few minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam President. what I'd like to do, as you catch your breath and take a drink of water, is, and so our audience knows what we're going to do in the time that we have, is go from the inside out. So I want to start with you, and then we're going to stay inside the borders of Republic of Kosovo, and then we're going to move out into the region, relations with Serbia, including under the EU-led dialogue, and more widely. So that's how I'd like to do it, and again, and we will, in the time that we have, open it up to audience questions. And because, you see, we have, especially at your request, a lot of SAI students here, a number of them are women. I just wanted to open, again, with you, coming from the inside out. Can you just describe a little bit more about your emergence as a political phenomenon in Kosovo, with this, a political force in your own right? Because you were not appointed to some, you didn't get your start. You came through the system, a male-dominated system, and challenged the party hierarchy. So I just thought that it would be quite interesting, especially for our students here, to could talk about that, and then we'll turn to some of these wider challenges, please, Madam President.
Sure. Should I remove the mask while I talk? Or not? Okay. Yeah, I'll keep the mask on. Look, I'm not going to try to paint a rosy picture. Quite the opposite. Being a woman in politics is challenging in any part of the world. But especially it's challenging in patriarchal societies where if you enter, especially the very first time when you enter politics and you're young, they look at you as if you've committed a crime just because you're young. And then you're a woman, young and women. That's a double crime for some. So it has been extremely difficult, absolutely not easy. However, it is, I often quote John McCain. There was one of the things that he said. He said, there's nothing more liberating than fighting for a cause greater than yourself. And I think this is what keeps you going. Understanding that what you're fighting for really has nothing to do with you as an individual. It has to do with the bigger cause, which in my case was making sure that I help my country move on, even if that my contribution is just one drop in the ocean. And secondly, it's about the legacy that you leave behind for all the little girls who are watching and who hope that you don't give up. And I know that because I was a little girl and I did watch so many women in Kosovo politics. And it is because so many of them did not give up. It is because of the hard work, resilience, and sacrifice of so many women before my generation that it became a little easier for me, that some of the bumps and rocks in the walking path were removed. So we need to make sure, as the current people in politics, as the women that are currently involved in politics, that we remove the rest of the hurdles. For the little girls who will later on become presidents and prime ministers and commanders-in-chief, and members of the police and the army, and join at the negotiation tables for Kosovo to join international organizations and so on and so forth. We need to make sure that for those girls, it's going to be so much easier than us. And that's, looking at the big picture, looking at the bigger cause, it's what helps you move on. For me, failure was never an option. And when I say failure, it's not about the political position that you will ultimately get. It's about doing the right thing. And I know that in politics, you're going to meet very few people who tell you that ultimately doing the right thing is always what pays off. It's always what will put both the interest of the people as well as the interest of your country move forward, and it will let you sleep at night, So it is extremely important that when you meet so many people around you who tell you, look, yeah, it's the right thing, but let's actually do something else because that will keep us at better relations with the leadership of the party or some other leader, or will move ahead your interest to go higher in the hierarchy. Don't choose the easiest way out if you truly believe that that's not the right thing for your people and for your country's interest. And for a country where so many generations had to sacrifice, including their lives. I lost so many of my peers, people from the same classroom where I used to go as a teenager during the war. So every single morning I wake up thinking about the fact that any one of them, if they were alive, could have sat where I'm sitting today. They couldn't, because they lost their lives to a brutal genocidal regime, so that today we can have the freedom, the independence, and the democracy that we enjoy. So the responsibility upon our shoulders is much higher than it is of most leaders around the world. It's not just to make the generations of the future proud, but also to make sure that we deliver for all of those who are not with us today.
Thank you, Madam President. About doing the right thing in politics, I certainly hope you have meetings in Congress and can convey that to some of our members of Congress. That's apparently been long forgotten as a goal among some. Let me turn to, again, staying within, we're going to come inside out. So staying with your government and the priorities for which you and the government headed by Prime Minister Kurti were elected, and indeed the priority of President Biden. President Biden has said that fighting corruption is a U.S. national security priority, corruption, organized crime. The EU has also made this a priority. So, and here, this is a topic that we delve into here at SAIS. If you could, Madam President, make it real for us. Make it real. Tell us what you and your colleagues, Prime Minister Kurti and others in government, are doing. What are the obstacles, the challenges you face? What kind of support do you need from the U.S. and the European Union on this fight against corruption? Because it's a scourge and we know it, but what does it really take to root this out, please?
It takes courage. It takes quite a lot of courage, because in any country around the world where these negative phenomena were present, they were very deep, very much connected to politics, and tried to capture important state institutions in a way where, decision-making and politics would then very much depend on clan interests and other kind of interests that had nothing to do with the people's interest or the country's interests. So again, I'm not going to say that this is an easy task, but I have to say that, as I mentioned earlier, if there's one topic where we will absolutely not give up, because we see that as a precondition to our success on anything else, that is rule of law. We will absolutely not give up. Failure is absolutely not an option in our rule of law efforts. And we do this not because our international partners are asking us to fight these negative phenomena that have kept Kosovo from moving forward as much as it could and deserved to move forward, but because it's ultimately what the people of Kosovo deserve. We do it for ourselves, not because the EU puts it in some sort of a progress report. It's because of ourselves, because we should do it even if the EU doesn't point it out. Secondly, I think it's very encouraging that President Biden has made fighting corruption abroad as a national security priority of the United States. And to break it out very simply, if our international partners decide to work with autocratic regimes, decide to do economy with autocratic regimes, with dangerous regimes, that ultimately means that they will use that money to militarize themselves so that they can destabilize the others. It's exactly what Serbia is doing with its autocratic regime. So working economically with other countries around the world, and that using that economic power in the benefit of Russia's interests in our region, which is why it is so important that President Biden had made that distinction and said, if you fight corruption, you're our partner. If you don't, that is a national security threat, not just to the country and to the people in that specific territory, but to the United States as well. And I think it's simply a lesson learned from history, that if you work with these kind of regimes, ultimately it's going to hurt the interest of that specific region. And then, let's say, in the Western Balkans, if there's no peace there, there's no peace in Europe. And if there's no peace in Europe, obviously this is a security threat for the United States as well. So it's like it can be a vicious cycle if you accept it as is, that sure, we can work with corruptive authorities, with, autocracies. It can become quite a vicious circle, and you will see the dangers of it yourself, even if you're geographically distant from that country. But then it can be a transformative positive circle. If you work with democracies, you work with those who deliver on rule of law, and finally you can see the fruits. You can bear the fruits of that cooperation. What we're doing, just a few words. First of all, we had to make sure that we transform legislation. We changed the legislation in a way that would allow reforms in our judiciary, would allow reforms in the justice and security sector. Because most of the political and other kind of influence was in attacking the justice system, where they wouldn't allow judges and prosecutors to make independent decisions. So that is, of course, changing, because first of all, the new institutions have absolutely no political influence or political attacks in the judges and prosecutors. But at the same time, we need to ensure that an urgent, well-prepared, in line with EU standards vetting system happens in Kosovo, based on criteria of professionalism, integrity, which I think is the most important part of this process, as well as all of kind of vettings when it comes to screening the assets and what the judges and prosecutors own. Something similar needs to happen with the current security institutions as well. Secondly, you mentioned that the police has one of the highest trust percentages in the region, actually the highest in the region when it comes to Kosovo police. They are working tirelessly to make sure that cases of corruption or organized crime go to the courts, and we have had record-breaking numbers in just 6 months. Hundreds and hundreds of cases of fighting criminal gangs in all parts of Kosovo, fighting organized crime and making sure that they face justice. And this level of fighting corruption and crime has never been seen in Kosovo's history, which is, as I said, being done primarily because it's in the interest of the people of Kosovo. Foreign direct investment is possible if you ensure that there is legal predictability, that there's no corruption in the justice system, that there's legislation that is implemented, that there is contract implementation, that if you go to a court, you know exactly what kind of law will be applied. So all of these, alongside the fact that we are changing our legislation to be in full line with acquis communautaire, are very important first steps, because we've been in power for 6-7 months. That's it, 6-7 months. But all these are extremely important first steps to show the commitment to rule of law, to show that uncorruptible people are running this country, to lead by example, to make sure that there are no compromises when it comes to rule of law and fighting organized crime in any part of Kosovo, and to also make sure that we will work together with our partners to coordinate all of these efforts. We do that primarily with the United States, as you can imagine, with different US agencies. And this has turned Kosovo into one of the most successful countries in fighting also cross-border crime, stopping big gangs who would use Kosovo as a transit to go through north of Kosovo to Serbia and other countries and move on, to the everyday cases that we see that are ending up in front of the justice institutions. Again, it's not an easy task, and we know it's going to take us not just the next 4 years, but the courage is there, the political will is there, the knowledge is also there, and the expertise. And we do hope that we're going to have the United States and the European Union by us every step of the way, because that's the one thing that they have been so loud and clear about in asking Kosovo to not just commit to, but also act to. And finally, we're turning our words into concrete action, and I do hope that this support will continue.
Thank you. Madam President, let me turn now to the related question of growing your economy. The U.S. has been supportive of certain economic initiatives stemming back from September a year ago on the Washington Agreement, and other steps there, such as what was then called the mini Schengen approach, subsequently rebranded. And there have been, as part of that, other initiatives with respect to infrastructure, including in energy and also other rail and other types of infrastructure projects and developments, and also the potential of developing resources, natural resources in Kosovo. So I want to ask you about that. Does your government share the perspective of the United States, of the position then of the Trump administration, now the Biden administration, on these matters, on these infrastructure projects, or do you have a different perspective about how the Kosovo economy should operate with itself and on these projects and with its neighbors?
I think connectivity within the region is crucial when it comes to attracting more foreign direct investment. Because what I often say is that when an investor looks at Kosovo, they shouldn't only be looking at the tiny Kosovo, but look at the entire region as a market, as a possible market. And then given our excellent geographical area that we belong to, also look at the entire European Union because of the free trade agreement that we have through the SAA, and the rest of our continent as places from where they could export within a day. Everything that is produced, let's say, in Kosovo, a country with a very cheap labor, a young population, multilingual, tech-savvy, and really doing well in so many areas. So connectivity in the region is extremely important. In principle, Kosovo has never been against infrastructural projects that are aiming at bringing our countries closer to one another when it comes to the distance, because that grows economy. That's the basic principle. Having said that, the projects that are mentioned in the Washington commitments are actually the exact same projects to which the Kosovo leadership had committed to as part of the EU Berlin process. So for that reason, we saw that, as perhaps just the support of the United States to something that Kosovo had committed to previously. Now, Kosovo has shown this commitment again when asking for the Berlin process agreements to be implemented, the ones on infrastructure, and to sign new ones when it comes to allowing freedom of movement of goods and people. So the question in the Washington commitments has not been about neglecting the importance of infrastructural projects which allow for more regional economic cooperation and which, through connectivity, can bring more foreign direct investment to the entire region, including Kosovo. The main question that we had and the concern in that kind of 1.5-pager, which included more than a dozen topics, there were two practically, or three. One was the so-called mini Schengen initiative, which has now turned, I wouldn't say rebranded, simply renamed. Renamed, yeah, the way how it is named is different, but it's practically the same idea behind it. Because we had, of course, first of all, we were not included, so this initiative is against the principle of inclusivity, which is the basic principle of regional cooperation, including all six. And secondly, because we had quite a lot of concerns when it comes to economics, when it comes to political cooperation, because Serbia will continue to deny the existence of Kosovo even within that initiative. When it comes to our European integration path, because the initiative was not designed to accelerate Kosovo's European integration, or of the Western Balkans for that matter, but to actually serve as a waiting room where the EU would say, okay, now you have your own Schengen, so you can stay there for the next 20 years, so you shouldn't join the European Union. We're too tired of the enlargement, so great. How about you deal with one another? Finally, from a security point of view, there's no way of tackling through that initiative the growing Russian influence in the region, especially the security threats that they have been creating in all of our region. Lately, we had to expel 2 Russian diplomats because of their concrete action against our sovereignty and constitutional order and security threats that they were representing. And of course, many other countries in the region, alongside NATO partners, had to do the same. And this initiative would allow for more growing Russian influence from a security point of view. So we had quite a lot of concerns, which we had introduced to everyone. And it is, very interesting. No one from the initiators had ever approached Kosovo with even one piece of paper to explain what do they actually want through this regional initiative. So they talk about it, but they've never managed to put it into a concise, even one-pager, that they would present and show why do they think that this initiative is important when we already have at least 3 other regional initiatives, the Berlin process notably, the most important one, which is an EU rule-based process that aims at bringing our countries closer to the European Union and treats all the countries there on the principle of equal footing. Then we have the RCC, the Regional Cooperation Council, we have CEFTA, and in all of these, there's one thing there is in common. Serbia has not implemented anything that it signed. So if for all of these we knew where is the fruit hanging, who are those who created the initiative, who are those who are the implementation mechanisms, for the Open Balkan Initiative, we don't know. So if Vučić doesn't implement in the Berlin Process Initiative, where the Chancellor of Germany and the President of France are overseeing the implementation process, how can we believe that he will implement an initiative where he's the boss? Obviously, anyone who knows Vučić knows that he won't. So this is just they try to replicate what already exists, but exists on sound principles of moving our countries towards European integration. The second thing that we had a problem with in the Washington commitment, but that has already expired, so not a problem any longer, was the so-called moratorium on Kosovo's, I call it, on Kosovo's foreign policy, because practically it asked our countries not to lobby on international recognition and membership in international organizations. So that has expired on the 4th of September. And I think that that was one of the biggest mistakes that any Kosovo prime minister or leader had made ever in any process related to Serbia. Kind of equalizing your strive, your fight to gain more recognitions as a country whose declaration of independence was found to be in full compliance with international law by the International Court of Justice, and to equalize what you did, what you have achieved, and what was found to be in line with international law, with what Serbia was illegally doing, using illegal means in a process of derecognitions, was one of the biggest mistakes, because it kind of made Kosovo's foreign policy as if it was dependent on what Serbia would say. You know, when we declared independence, it wasn't our idea nor our partner's idea that we should only declare it and ask for recognitions if Serbia agrees. No, we did it in spite of that, in spite of the fact that we knew Serbia might never agree. In spite of that, of the fact that Serbia has not recognized, we managed to achieve 117 recognitions and become a member of over 100 international or regional cooperation organizations. All we need to do is sit down with our partners and do exactly what we were doing back in 2008 and 2010. Work together on this front, and I'm sure that the successes will be there.
Understand, and
sorry, perhaps just
please.
a sentence. Having made those 2 points, Kosovo has implemented the rest of the Washington commitments. So it has shown, including establishing an embassy in Israel and all of the other points
Sure.
that are mentioned there when it comes to designing Hezbollah as a terrorist organization and so on and so forth. Everything else was implemented. And we have shown, again, even in that case, that we are committed to our international obligations, especially if they're signed in the Oval Office, while Serbia has not. Look at their piece of paper. Did they give up on Huawei and other kind of, Chinese technology? No, they have opened their own regional office in Belgrade. Did they open an embassy, which they were supposed to do, I think, until July of this year? In Israel, no, they haven't. So they haven't implemented even what they signed in the Oval Office.
Yes, in Jerusalem, yes, and I understand very well what you said about the moratorium. In some ways, it was the U.S. became the guarantor of, by brokering that agreement, became the guarantor of Kosovo's international isolation. So I understand about that moratorium which has expired. Let me turn to the relations in Kosovo. Again, we're working our way out. So not yet with the dialogue in Serbia, but just staying within the borders of your country. You're the president of all the citizens of Kosovo, including Kosovo Serbs. So I want to ask you, how do you view that responsibility, and how do you view relations within Kosovo with the Kosovo Serb community, as it's known under your constitution, which you had a hand in drafting, and in particular, what do you think about Kosovo's performance and fulfillment of its obligations? For example, the Constitutional Court order on Dečani and on other issues, on the ability of Serbs to return, to come back and not face threats. How do you view that on perceptions as well of security by Kosovo Serbs, which had been rising, and then in the last USAID, UNDP survey, it dropped again. So please, as president, how do you view that responsibility towards the Kosovo Serb community?
You've quoted the OSCE report, and according to that, and also our local reports, the interethnic incidents in Kosovo amount to 0.03 of cases. As president, I'm committed to bringing that down to 0. As people who had to go through hell in the past, we are shaped in a way where we really want to make sure that no one is subject to any kind of discrimination. We owe it to everyone in our country to make sure that everyone feels they can unleash their entire potential in an undiscriminating environment, no matter their ethnicity. I strongly believe that multi-ethnicity is one of the biggest values that we have as a country. Not just our Constitution was founded on this principle, but it was something that we worked so hard in making a value of our society, which now all of the people of Kosovo really embrace. There is one specific security problem, but that is not related to either any action or inaction of the Kosovo institutions, or anything that the people of Kosovo, or Albanians, or other non-Serb, non-Albanian minority communities are committing. It is specifically related to the gangs in Kosovo North who have been financed, supported, and incited by President Vučić of Serbia himself for many years now, as illegal structures operating in the north who are terrorizing the Kosovo Serbs living in the north. The Serbs of Kosovo are not afraid of me. Neither are they afraid from any Kosovo political leader. They are afraid of these gangs who are threatening them on daily basis, and it has been confirmed through US State Department reports and European Union reports that in every single election process, they intimidate these structures, they intimidate the Serbs living in North Kosovo. They force them to vote for certain political parties. They don't allow them to exercise their freedom to elect or be elected, therefore violating some of their basic human rights. So they don't feel safe, but it doesn't have to do with Kosovo's institutions not doing their job. Quite the opposite. It has to do with Serbia's efforts to keep the Serbs living in Kosovo, Kosovo Serbs, as hostage to their policies of the previous centuries. Now, of course, the new institutions have been working tirelessly in bringing rule of law to Kosovo North as well. And I'm going to mention a point here. You know, these organized crime groups in the past, they were multinational, multi-ethnic. They didn't care about ethnicity. They found a common language. They worked together, you know, in the south, in the north, and so on and so forth. What has changed now, what is different now, is that the effort for rule of law is multi-ethnic. You find Kosovo Albanian police officers alongside Serb police officers, Kosovo Serbs, fighting together in these operations for rule of law and against organized crime. You have Kosovo Serb judges, Kosovo Serb prosecutors leading these operations, leading these investigations in rule of law. So multi-ethnicity is working in action in Kosovo, except for those places where Vucic's hand is too deep, and they have, you know, for years invested financially, politically, even security-wise, to make sure that they destabilize the part of the territory which is North Kosovo. But I think with the latest actions in fighting these groups, we have to be patient. We have to understand that it cannot change overnight. But absolutely, I see success stories coming up to make sure that every Serb living in Kosovo, whether in the north or elsewhere, feels secure. Again, I know that there is so much more that we have to do to make sure that there is more trust between the communities living in Kosovo, but we will be able to do that when no group is stronger than the state institutions. When these groups, illegal groups that are founded and supported by another country, in this case Serbia, don't have any force or support from the Kosovo Serbs. I'm absolutely committed to working alongside Serbs, Kosovo Serbs, to make sure that we deliver on what truly matters to them, which is jobs, which is security, which is economic empowerment, which is gender equality. Because if you talk to, I come from Mitrovica, and if you talk to women in the north or women in the south, whether they are Serb or Albanian, they face the same challenges. If you talk to youth in the north or in the south, they talk about jobs that they need. So we will absolutely deliver for all of our citizens, and we feel the same kind of responsibility towards every citizen of Kosovo, no matter their nationality. It's going to take some time for all of that trust to be built, but I'm very confident that by fighting those who have been keeping hostage the Kosovo Serbs, we will be able to really get to the level of trust where we can also deliver on their expectations.
Understand, thank you. And taking note of that clear and direct allegation about President Vucic and direct engagement and involvement in the north with criminal gangs that you mentioned, let's turn now. Let's come outside the borders of the Republic of Kosovo. Let's look at relations with Serbia and the EU-led dialogue. The perception, and you know this, is that, look, there's this, the EU is just facilitating, that there are these commitments the sides have made, and that among these commitments is the commitment of Pristina in 2013 and 2015 to have agreed to the association/community of Serb municipalities in Kosovo. And you've heard, I'm sure, EU Special Representative Lajčák say many times the Latin phrase, pacta sunt servanda, you have to implement what has been agreed. So how do you, what's your perspective on that? What about, I'm sure there are elements that have been agreed on that, from your perspective, haven't been implemented. But what can you say specifically about this association/community of Serb municipalities? Do you, as president of your country, can you envision that a way that this association/community could be constructed that is not a Republika Srpska, but yet addresses some issues of trust and economic collaboration and mutual interest of both the Kosovo Albanian and the Kosovo Serb communities? Could you address that specifically, please?
perhaps to speak a little as a legal professional, not just as president of the country. I don't know of any place in the world where segregation and separation has led to trust. It leads to divisions. It doesn't lead to trust. Living together and not breaking down or creating barriers based on ethnic lines is what we should understand. Because when the Association of Municipalities was put on paper, first in 2013, later on in 2015, obviously then Kosovo leaders understood the principle of pacta sunt servanda. But I think what we should all understand, including the EU, is that there are some other internationally renowned legal principles. And one of those is that when you sign something, it needs to be in line with your constitutional order. Having said that, the 2015 document signed at that time between then Kosovo Prime Minister and Serbian Prime Minister was taken to the Constitutional Court of Kosovo to check whether that document, that agreement, was in line with Kosovo's constitution. The Constitutional Court said that it's absolutely not in line, any part of it, including the title, which allows for the creation of a mono-ethnic entity, which also allows for executive powers for this association of municipalities that would create a third layer of governance, which is not allowed in our constitution. And it is a prelude to Republica Srpska, because if you go back to 1991 and check how we've come to Republica Srpska, takes me back to, context always matters. Look back to how every problem was created. Looking back in history, 1999, what is today known as Republika Srpska at that time was known as a Zajednica, Association of Municipalities. Later on, that association declared their independence. And later on, a few years after, it was recognized by Dayton, Ohio agreement at that time. So it started exactly the same way that now some try to push forward as the Association of Serb Municipalities. And a little bit more context. From 1999 until 2013, Serb municipalities were working together with Albanian majority municipalities, Turkish majority municipalities. All of them were together in the so-called Association of Kosovo Municipalities. It's an NGO in accordance with all of the EU instruments, including Council of Europe instruments on self-governance and regional cooperation. And simply it's an NGO where municipalities, no matter their nationality, lobby with the national government for more rights for the municipalities, for more decentralization, which is absolutely fine. An NGO where the municipalities would be lobbying for something like that is allowed under our constitution and under our own legislation. What is not allowed, that you give this association the kind of powers that your country has from the national level, the kind of executive powers which were given in the 2015 agreement and which were rendered unconstitutional by the Constitutional Court of Kosovo. And look, back at that time, Serbia agreed that this agreement would be checked in the Constitutional Court before it's implemented. That's exactly what we did. So we're simply implementing what the agreement said. The agreement said, send it to the Constitutional Court before implementation to check if it's in line with the Constitution. That's precisely what we did. The Constitutional Court answered, no, you cannot implement it, otherwise you're in violation of your own Constitution. Final point, I think implementing those executive powers is not just a prelude to Republika Srpska, another Republika Srpska in our region, but I think it also goes against the huge long-term investment that our partners have made for the stability in Kosovo and beyond. Going ahead with these kind of ideas, with mono-ethnic entities, which go against the very fabric of Kosovo's statehood, which is multi-ethnicity, which is living together, which is not setting barriers, which is not dividing people on their ethnic lines. it's also not good for our international partners because it makes quite a lot of headaches for you as well. It means that for the next 30 or 50 years, or God knows how many, you're going to have to deal with lack of stability in Kosovo the same way that the world is dealing with lack of stability in Bosnia. What is happening in Bosnia today should be the biggest lesson to learn for everyone who tries to push forward such disastrous ideas such as a mono-ethnic association, which is a prelude to Republica Srpska and a prelude to partition of Kosovo, something that I believe none of those who truly worked for an independent and sovereign Kosovo want.
Thank you, Madam President. My last question, and then we're going to turn it open to the audience, and we'll collect a few from the audience straight away. But we're in Washington. I have to close and ask you this. The relations between the Republic of Kosovo and the United States of America are, this is foundational for your country. This is, it's not like relations with any other state. You're in Washington. You know, President Biden has been a staunch supporter, a critical supporter of Kosovo back since the 1990s. He recently, his late son, Bo, served in Kosovo. Yes. He recently gave a rather warm statement of connection from the White House just recently about Kosovo. That all being said, let me ask you this, President Osmani. Are Washington and Pristina online on the key issues that face the country within the dialogue, within some of these economic projects that were noted? Are you online with the United States? Is Pristina and Washington, are you online on these, or are there some significant differences? Please.
We're absolutely online. The level of coordination that we have with the United States is the kind of coordination that I can freely say, having followed the Kosovo institutions for the past 2 decades, it's a level that we haven't seen before. We've shown the kind of commitment to coordinate with the United States that was unseen before. And we're committed to doing that, not just because we really believe that Kosovo owes to America. We owe it a lot because of our freedom and our independence, but also because we share the same values. We believe on the same values, and we also want to be successful. Kosovo's success has been very much connected to US support, whether on recognitions, memberships, and so on and so forth. So we coordinate more than just on a daily basis. But at the same time, the new leadership of Kosovo is absolutely honest on what we stand for. We don't lie. We don't commit to things that we cannot deliver. The United States knows us very well. They knew from the very beginning what we stand for, what we believe in, and all of these are not just connected to, Kosovo-centric ideas. What we believe in, what we will deliver on, are things that we also believe are in the interest of this bilateral partnership and beyond, and US interests abroad, which is, as I mentioned, fighting corruption and crime, being successful in aligning our foreign policy with that of the United States. In these past 6.5 or 7 months that I've been elected president, there's no day that we don't speak with US officials. And there hasn't been one case, not even one, where they have shown any kind of big disagreement on any kind of policy issues, whether it's domestic or foreign policy. And as we all know, US officials are very direct. Very direct if they disagree with you, in public and behind closed doors. So it has not happened in public, and it has not happened, absolutely has not happened behind closed doors. Quite the opposite. We were seen and told many times that we are considered as champions of US-Kosovo relations because of this very strong coordination. And that having said, there are, of course, some issues like the concerns that I explained on the issue of association of municipalities. What is very important is that we have always been very honest with the United States on why we think this will damage Kosovo interests as well as US interests abroad, why this will be very dangerous, And the relationship that we have with Biden administration is one of mutual respect, one of mutual understanding, and listening and deciding based on arguments. So I think that's extremely important.
Thank you very much. Now let's, do we have a microphone here for questions? No, we do not. That's okay. Let me acknowledge Ambassador Shimunovic of Croatia, please.
Thank you very much, Ed. Madam President, thank you so much for sharing with us your thoughts and on a very ambitious domestic and international agenda. That's quite an agenda. Godspeed, our very best wishes. And Ed, thank you very much for convening this timely meeting. We go way back, and having lived together in Yugoslavia, we know what you have been describing as the discrimination of Kosovo Albanians, and that has been secret, but that has been well known to us all, particularly starting from the early 80s. After early 80s, it became a true reality. So there are the deep roots in your longing for freedom, and as also having lived together, we know that the Albanians are one of the oldest European nations. We are all relative newcomers in that regard. So let me get to my point. Madam President, do you see, and where do you see them eventually, some points of convergence within the actual political configuration of talks with Belgrade, as the things are?
Thank you. Perhaps a good moment to express my appreciation for our steadfast partnership with Croatia, a country that has really stood by us during the darkest days, but also the bright days. So really thank you on behalf of all the people of Kosovo for what your country has done and is still doing to help us out. It's always easier with friends like you. Secondly, I believe that in the days and years to come, what is going to be the biggest difficulty is the fact that Serbia is not interested to reach a final binding agreement that is centered on mutual recognition. They don't want to do it. They want to drag it, perhaps until the year when they get closer to joining the European Union. And that might take many years, as you know, which means that the more they drag the process because they're not interested to finish with a final binding legal agreement centered on mutual recognition, the more there will be instability in the region. Serbia, as we often mention in Kosovo, sees all of us, countries that are not already in the EU, as temporary countries, something that they can destroy in the meantime. And that means that there will be more destabilization efforts in the future. When they sit at the negotiation, the dialogue table, they say no to every proposal coming from Kosovo. No matter how simple or straightforward it is when it comes to instilling peace in the region, they say no. But they don't bring forward anything. They don't make proposals. They use insults at the table, unfortunately, and you know what kind of insults they use, because these are leaders who served under Milosevic. So practically we all know them well. But they don't commit, they don't show active engagement in the dialogue, unlike Kosovo, that is actively engaging, not just sitting at the table, but actively engaging to put forward good proposals so that things can move forward. The second biggest challenge is the fact, that was just the general approach. The second biggest challenge is the fact that they insist in having these association of municipalities, Republica Srpska style, before anything else. So they want to make sure that they render you dysfunctional before they even talk about recognition. And this is an extremely big challenge because, look, Bosnia and Herzegovina has a seat at the United Nations, but the kind of challenges that they are facing when it comes to their functionality as a state are the kind of challenges that we need to avoid. It's not just about the seat, It's about being a successful voice in that seat, being able to speak up for your country, not having to ask 2 or 3 other presidents about your position on behalf of the people of your country. I think this is going to be one of the biggest challenges. And thirdly, while Serbia is abusing the process of the dialogue to tell countries that are geographically distant from our continent, don't recognize Kosovo because we're having a negotiation on status, obviously that's damaging us because obviously we're not negotiating Kosovo's final status. That had been resolved once and forever back in 2008. But they abused the argument of us sitting in the table with them for the sake of blocking Kosovo's recognition internationally. And they unfortunately will continue to do so. The European Union should understand that with autocrats, appeasement never works. Trying to appease an autocrat can lead to disaster. It never leads to success. This is a lesson from history, whether we're talking about Russia or some other part of the world. You cannot use appeasement. And secondly, they should stop treating Vučić as the pro-European, which he's not. He's not. Perhaps he says a couple of nice things, but he never walks the talk. He has increased his level of military, economic, and political cooperation with Russia, and he has achieved the kind of dependency on Russia that you have never seen in the history of that country. And the EU should speak loud and clear against these tendencies, which are not just keeping Serbia itself hostage from moving forward, but also the rest of the region. I mentioned 3, but as you know very well, there are more than 30 challenges in this process, so perhaps I should stop here.
Thank you, and thank you, Ambassador Shimunovic. And now let me acknowledge, as an academic yourself, President Osmani, you'll appreciate I'm going to acknowledge now Professor Bill Zartman, and if you know the term ripeness in conflict management and really the field of conflict management, this is the progenitor of that whole school. Please, Professor Zartman.
I actually don't have a ripeness question. I had a more geographic question. An exchange of territories and populations on an ethnic basis with Serbia has been mentioned, and I think you all have rejected it as a basis for better relations. Could you analyze that issue a little bit? And then how do you see the evolution of relations between the 2 Albanian populated countries next door to each other, between yourself, Kosovo, and Albania?
And let me just quickly sharpen this second one. Is union of Kosovo and Albania, which has been promoted by Prime Minister Kurti before he, after elections, but before he became Prime Minister, is this consistent with the vision that you have for Kosovo? Please.
On the issue of exchange of territories, as I said at the beginning, I believe that division on ethnic lines never leads to solving problems. Some even tried to call that idea as a peaceful ethnic cleansing. Look, ethnic cleansing is a crime. Peaceful or not, it's still an international crime. And it would definitely not be peaceful in our part of the world. And it would definitely not stop with just Kosovo and Serbia. We all know that. It would open Pandora's box for the region and beyond. It would not only stop with the Western Balkans. I think ideas where people are divided on ethnic lines, where just because you belong to a different nationality, you're not allowed to live in a certain country, are ideas of the 19th century. And it's precisely these kind of ideas where one nation is being treated as more better than the other. You know, these kind of fascist ideas, I have to be very direct, are what led to the wars of the 90s. What led to the wars in the 90s. And the idea of exchange of territories and divisions is actually an idea of early 90s. Early 90s. Dobrica Ćosić, member of the academia in Serbia, who pushed it forward. At that time, the founder of our independent country, Ibrahim Rugova, said no, absolutely not, because it was against the idea and the will of the people of Kosovo for an independent and sovereign Kosovo. Since then, more than 13,000 civilians were killed in Kosovo. More than 20,000 women were raped during the war. We have the highest number of children killed per capita compared to any other wars in Yugoslavia. We have lost and suffered too much to now go backwards. And these are ideas, daring, dangerous ideas of the past that would simply bring bloodshed. They have never brought peace, and they will not, especially in the Balkans, bring peace. We have rejected these ideas, and we will continue to do so. And precisely because we've lost so many people for the dream of an independent and sovereign Kosovo, it is why I believe that we need to protect this project, to protect it with everything, with all our might, with all of our powers, and to work together with our partners to make sure that it's a true success story, that it continues to be a true success story. I strongly believe that the Republic of Kosovo is there to stay forever as an independent and sovereign nation that is a result of a very long sacrifice. And at the same time that working side by side with Albania in not just, removing all kind of barriers, trade barriers, economic barriers, barriers in terms of cooperating in language and culture and others, which would bring the people of Kosovo and the people of Albania closer together. Having 2 seats at the UN makes us stronger. Having 2 votes in international organizations makes us stronger. Working side by side in removing barriers and joining in the European Union as independent nations, but where borders will really not have any meaning any longer, is the dream that we share. The ICJ, the International Court of Justice, gave a very interesting analysis of not just the legal background of what brought to the Declaration of Independence, but also the factual background. It talked about the celebrations in the streets of the people of Kosovo the day we declared independence. Anyone who has any doubt as to what the will of the people of Kosovo is needs to simply go back to the memories of 17 February 2008. Yes, we will work very close with Albania, but our dream is to have excellent relations with any other neighbor. Kosovo has always been the peaceful neighbor, the one who has never attacked, the one who has always been an exporter of peace and stability, and the one that is really out there committing to work on good neighborly relations. I do hope that we will all live up to see Serbia giving the same kind of contribution and to see Kosovo sitting around the table next to Croatia and other nations within the European Union. At that time, no one will talk about borders any longer, but simply how to prosper and how to work more for our people.
Thank you, President Osmani. We're over time, and this is just such an exceptional opportunity, and I see some FPI colleagues there. So I'm just going to get these last round of questions. We may not have time, but if you can just, as quickly as possible, just to allow these. And you mentioned Kosovo's relations with its neighbors. North Macedonia and Montenegro recognize Kosovo, and I'm going to recognize my friend from Montenegro, Professor Siniša Vuković, please, and then this gentleman, and then Ivica Puljic, and that'll be it. Please, Siniša. And then let me just collect. And then we'll finish, and that'll be please, sir. Yes.
Yeah, Madam President, thanks so much for joining us today. I'm a student here at SAIS. You've repeatedly spoken about as a foreign policy priority for your government
Thank you for that. Great to have a question from a SAIS student, and then correspondent with Al Jazeera Balkans, Ivica Puljic, please.
Thank you. I'm wondering what do you think of the current situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina? You mentioned Bosnia a few times during your speech. And Mr. Escobar, who is special envoy, U.S. envoy for the Western Balkans, right now, today in Sarajevo, he's talking with everybody. This is the biggest crisis after the war. How do you see that situation, and how do you react if you are in Sarajevo?
And that'll be it, and then we'll close.
Thank you. Perhaps to start with the first question, if I mention names, those politicians in Serbia would be attacked enormously, so I probably shouldn't do that. But beyond names, I should talk about what I think would be the best thing also for the people of Serbia, and that is a leadership that doesn't keep them hostage of the past, but a leadership that doesn't escape from dealing with the past, whether in terms of apologizing for the crimes that it committed, delivering justice, and opening up by recognizing Kosovo, by not destabilizing Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro, and the rest, and really opening up to new perspectives where the entire region can succeed. Whoever that is, obviously we would love to work with him or her. But I shouldn't be putting any names. I'm hopeful that these leaders will emerge in Serbia as well, and that we will come to a point where they will also recognize the reality of an independent country of Kosovo, as they did with any other former Yugoslav republic. When it comes to the practical challenges that we have when it comes to joining the United Nations, look, we've already become a member of some UN agencies like the IMF, the World Bank, and we're aiming to become members of others where UN membership is not a requirement, but simply a vote with 2/3 or a majority. So that is one thing that gives us a voice at the table on issues of climate change, on issues of health, and on other issues. At COP26, I saw a tweet saying leaders from all over the world have joined to talk about climate change. I felt like retweeting it and saying, not all over the world. You've missed Kosovo. Despite of our clear request to be part of that, because for the first time we have institutions in Kosovo that have committed to the green agenda. Unfortunately, the UN said, you're not a member, so you should not be here. So they kind of acted as if climate change just skips us. It doesn't skip us. We will be dealing, and we're already dealing, with the consequences of climate change, so we should have been included and had our voice heard. When it comes to membership at the UN, we believe the higher the number of recognitions of Kosovo, the bigger the pressure on Russia not to veto. Hopefully that day will come. We're going to work tirelessly and with patience and together with our partners to make it happen, because as you know, that's the procedure for joining the United Nations. The next question, the last question about Bosnia and Herzegovina. Kosovo is a strong supporter of Bosnia and Herzegovina's territorial integrity. And of course, we see the latest threats by Dodik as absolutely destabilizing not just Bosnia and Herzegovina, but also destroying the efforts of the international community there for the past more than 2 decades. For that reason, we believe that, as I said at the beginning, dealing with these kind of autocrats, the kind of, that Dodik it is never the right solution to appease them, because appeasing them encourages them to go towards war. Warmongering and the kind of hate speech and rhetoric that he has been using, with the blessing and pushing of Vučić, because he never does it alone. Everyone living in the region knows that he doesn't do it alone without the blessing and the support of Serbia, is what might destroy decades-long efforts of the international community for stability in the Western Balkans, and the efforts of all of us together to join the European Union. That is why transatlantic cooperation and the highest attention possible from the United States is more than welcome to make sure that these efforts from Dodik, supported by his friends in Serbia, are stopped. We speak up everywhere we go, from Washington to Berlin and other places, not just for ourselves. We speak up for Bosnia and Herzegovina as well. for our friends in Montenegro and the rest who are dealing with these kind of problems from Serbia. And we have been trying to really join voices. I'm working very closely with the other presidents in the region to make sure that when we speak up together. And hopefully, when we speak up together, we can be heard in a more loud and clear way than we have in the past. Because if one country is not safe, if one country is not stable, all of the rest of the Western Balkans will not be stable either. So we need to help out each other, and we're going to do everything that we can to make sure that we seek the support of our partners, also for the safety and stability and the territorial integrity of Bosnia as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you so much, President Osmani. And I'm going to quickly, I've been instructed to ask everyone to please, after we thank President Osmani, to please keep your seats until she and her team exit. And just allow me, President Osmani, to thank you so much for so openly and directly engaging with us this morning. We really appreciate it, and also wish you your great success in your efforts to fight corruption and to develop Kosovo's democracy and its economy for all its citizens. And I know everyone will join me in thanking you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Thank you very much.